pure experiences.
Welcome to the Pure Experiences Podcasts.
Logic is about true and false. A powerful and well-developed ability of logic is a must for any truth seeker. A spiritual seeker is seeking the truth, and therefore it is a logical necessity that he must sharpen this tool of the mind. How to do that? Is this only an intellectual exercise? What is the utility of logic? Welcome to Pure Experiences Podcast. Today we are discussing spirituality and logic. What is logic? It is an ability of the mind. Just like its innumerable abilities, logic is one of the ability of the mind. More correctly, it is application of the rational ability of the mind. It involves some particular processes, that are used to acquire knowledge, to manipulate knowledge, and to reach to this much needed classification of true and false. So it is a set of processes in the mind that when they are carried out, enables the mind to classify any experience into true or false. Rationality is the ability to recognize truth, and logic is the application of this rational ability of the mind. What are these processes? These processes, the mental processes, they involve finding out the equivalence or identity of two experiences, predicting classification of an experience into true or false, detecting contradictions and oppositions in the true and false statements, finding out whether something exists as a necessity, induction, finding out one true statement from other true statements, reference, derivation, implication, classification, and so on. These are just few examples of what the logical function of the mind does. It does all these things. When you quantify the logic, it is called mathematics. So today we are not going into the world of mathematics, which is a very specialized form of logic, very abstract form of logic. We are going to stay at mostly the practical level, and we are going to focus at the specific kind of logic that a spiritual seeker needs to deal with, needs to cultivate. As I said, why do we need to cultivate this ability? Logic is about finding out the truth. Logic is about assessing, testing your own knowledge, the knowledge that you have gained from direct experience. If you recall, logic is one of the four valid means of gaining knowledge. The praman, the logic, is very important. It is placed at the second number. The first is obviously the direct experience. Second is logic. The third is an experienced teacher, and fourth is a text or a book, words of the experienced teacher. So as we know, in the spiritual path, truth is very important. When we say, I am seeking truth, you are looking for a knowledge that is rational, that is logical, that is almost 100% certain, that has no contradictions. And when you derive statements out of that truth, they must match your direct experience, or they should be self-consistent, should not change. You should not find any contradictions between the true and that which is your experience. So it is an essential ability for a student on the spiritual path, and especially on the path of knowledge, because we use knowledge as a means to reach the state of no knowledge on the path of knowledge. So I'm going to focus on logic as applicable for a spiritual seeker although it is not anything different. It is not a special variety of logic which only is useful for a spiritual person. It is for everyone. Actually, the logic that a spiritual seeker needs is much, much more powerful and sharp than something which an ordinary person or even a scientist would need. This ability is of a great importance for a spiritual seeker, much more important than that for a mathematician or a lawyer or an ordinary person on the street. A spiritual seeker needs to use the highest kind of logic, the most strict kind of logic. Otherwise, his chances of getting to the truth are next to nothing. You cannot commit an error on the path of knowledge and call it your achievement. There can be errors, but then the logical ability comes to rescue. How can you find that there is an error? How can you know that what I think is true is not true? It is because of this ability of the mind. And this is available for a human mind. Fortunately, we are in this form right now, and therefore it becomes easy to achieve a spiritual goal. The logic is absent in the lower forms, and strangely, it is absent in most of the humanity. It is a common saying that man is a rational animal, but it is very rare to find a rational person. The number of rational people is minuscule in human society. Why is that? Because it is an ability. It needs to be cultivated. Rational and logical thinking is subject to cultivation or learning or practice. Just like there is a tiny number of people who can play a musical instrument. There is a tiny number of people who are good at science, inventing things, or mathematics. In the same way, there is a tiny number of people who are good in logical and rational thinking. The statement, man is a rational animal, is actually falls into a logical fallacy of one kind, which is also known as gross generalization. We'll talk about fallacies in a minute. So let us we'll take a deeper look at the logic. You will find that we don't need a very sophisticated logic in order to get started on the path of knowledge. We need a basic kind of logic, a very fundamental kind of logic in order to start our journey on the path of knowledge. And the more you refine it, the more you refine your ability of logical and rational thinking, the nearer you will get to the truth, whatever the truth is. You will need to first logically define true and false. So we have done this exercise a few times. You will need to set up criteria for true and false and use your logical ability to classify your experiences into true and false. Experience is not a problem. Knowledge is the problem. And knowledge that is illogical is worse than ignorance. At least in ignorance you don't know. And unknowingly you have acquired a belief. But use of a bad logic will lead you to a belief which now has this foundation of appearance of it being true. This is a dangerous situation. An ignorance that appears logical is very difficult to get rid of. So, a spiritual seeker needs a formal education of logic. Unfortunately, even the best of the teachers are not equipped to provide you this knowledge. And whenever I say logic, most of the people are terrified because it is an intellectual ability that very few have. So no need to be afraid of this word. It is actually very easy to be logical. Once you are logical, you will find that it is almost impossible to be illogical again. You need to just cross this learning curve in order to achieve that kind of confidence in your logic. And the fundamentals can be learned very, very quickly. But yes, it is unfortunate that teachers don't teach it. The logic is not taught as a subject in the schools, at least in the schools where I am from. And it is a subject of very selected people, such as those who study the philosophy, those who study mathematics, those who are logicians, those who are lawyers, or computer scientists, and very tiny amount of psychologists and psychiatrists. They study logic because they need to find out the logical fallacies and biases in the minds of their patients. So, in general, people regard logic as occupation of a selected few professional people. That is true, and that is logical, but a seeker needs to get at least the essential education in logic. There is no need to be afraid of it. It is not a waste of time. It is going to make you progress very fast, and it will show you all the errors that you made, because errors lead to beliefs. Beliefs are caused by incorrect assessment of your experience, illogical assessment of your experience. That is what all the ignorance is. And therefore, only logic can bring you to correct knowledge. So, those who are starting will need logic. And you will find that as you progress on the path of knowledge, the statements will cease to become logical or illogical. The statements will acquire an aura of mystery. They will be mostly paradoxical. Yet, the mind has now progressed so far that it can see through the paradoxes. The mind, at this stage, should be able to see through the logical, illogical, rational, irrational, paradoxical, and true and false. And you will find that the truth is not logical. It is not also illogical. It is not true, and it is not false. And to reach this logicless place, you should and you must start with logic, just like with everything else in spirituality. To reach no mind, you use the mind. To reach no experience, you use the experience, and so on. So the obvious question is, how can I cultivate my logical ability? And there is a good news and there is bad news. The bad news is first, which is we are not born with fully functional formal logic in our mind, just like language, just like other arts and sciences, other abilities. The logical ability must be acquired from a teacher, from the society. So it becomes really impossible to cultivate this ability without a teacher. The teacher need not be a big logician, need not be a big philosopher or mathematician in order to impart this teaching. Only thing is that he should have enough experience to separate true from false, and he should know how he did that. And this guru, this teacher, should be able to transmit this teaching to the student. That's all is needed. But yes, if you try to learn logical ability by yourself, many years will pass and you will not become good enough. It is like learning cooking. You can try it, and after many years, you will be able to cook a decent meal. But if you take some training under a cook, or even your mother, you will become a decent cook in only a few days. Same with logic. Same with every kind of knowledge that is inherited from the society. So society is not totally useless. All we are because of the society. It is the afflictions in the society that we need to stay away from. Just like everything else, the society has the good and bad. So these arts and sciences and knowledge, they come from the society. Your guru, you will find in the society. The Guru is not going to drop from the sky. You will need to find him around you, and then the Guru can impart this teaching. And the highest kind of teaching is not telling of truth. It is not simply stating, look, this is true, this is not true. This is not the highest kind of teaching. The highest teaching is to show why something is true according to your own experience. A teacher will not tell you what to think. A teacher will always tell you how to think and arrive at your own truth. When you arrive at truth like this, you are 100% certain. When somebody tells you that this is true, look, this is how it is because of such and such reason, because everybody says it is true, you should also simply assume it true and go home. This is not teaching, this is preaching. And it is a logical fallacy to assume such things as true just because somebody said it. You should not assume on the path of knowledge. It is all experience, logic, and experimentation, implementation of that knowledge in your own life. This is how we progress on the path of knowledge. So how to cultivate this ability? I think you must have guessed the answer. It is under a competent guide. This is the best way. That is the ideal way. And somebody who is already on a spiritual path, that will be best for you. If not, you can find somebody who can teach you this ability. That will be the fastest. Otherwise, you can take the help of books, where it depends on your intelligence if you can grasp whatever is written in that book. Because the books about the logic are going to be heavy. They are not easy to digest. They are not easy to understand. You always need a practical example instead of symbolic logic, the formal logic that is presented in the books. Although you can refer to them, I am not discouraging you. Some people are very intelligent, and simply reading something about logic will be enough for them. But for somebody like me, I learn very quickly only by example. Show me this and I learn it very quickly. So this is how I acquired a little bit of logical ability. I am not saying that I am a master logician. No, just enough to find out the BS from the useful. Now, a true seeker will not even categorize things into true and false. He will simply say, oh, this is useful for me. This has made me progress. That's all. So that is the minimal application of logic. That's how I use it. A true and false is a secondary goal. First thing we should pay attention to is whether this logical ability is useful for me or not, whether it is getting rid of my beliefs or not, whether it is bringing me to the state of not knowing, agnostic position. Once you are at the state of I don't know, then you need to worry about what is true, what is false. So if you're not fortunate enough to find such a guru who is great in logic and rational ability, you can look for inspiration among philosophers. Read them and see how logical they are, how precisely they form their sentences, how nicely they deduce something, and how certainly they arrive at some conclusions. So I'm not saying that that will be the true conclusion or something. Just look at the method. That's all you need to know. And then you need to use that method, use that logical reasoning, the train of thoughts to arrive at your own true statements. So that is the biggest mistake people do, is read the books and they read the bottom line. Oh, this must be true because said by such a great philosopher. If you go into the meat of the book, most of the book on the philosophy will be how that statement was arrived at. And it will be a long discussion about the logic, the reason, and the experiences behind that logic. If you are not interested in reading also the great logicians or the great minds, or you don't have the time, then there is an easy way. Make friends with logical people. Get rid of the illogical people, irrational people who can't differentiate between a potato and a truck. If you are stuck with such people, there is no hope. So choose your friends carefully. Make those as your friend who are very, very logical and rational. So sometimes I say that if you want to instinctively acquire the logical ability, make friends with a lawyer, because their profession demands very acute logical thinking. Their behavior, their talk, their manners are impregnated with logic always. Now, I'm not saying always, probably most of the time. They will act as an ordinary, illogical human being most of the time, but as soon as you utter the word truth, evidence, false, fallacy, bias, decision, and so on, the logical center of the lawyer, in the mind of the lawyer, will get activated, will start functioning, and they think in a different way. They can teach you a lot. Similarly, mathematicians or even a physicist has the ability to teach you the basic rules of logic. So choose your friends very carefully if you want to quickly acquire this ability. Now, I'm not saying you will just kick everybody away. You just don't get inspired by your illogical friends. Probably they're good. Probably they are your true friends. But as far as this ability is concerned, they are zero. They are not useful for you. You don't need to totally get disconnected from them, because then probably you will be left with nobody because you will find all your relatives, all your friends, all the people in your office, everybody that you encounter on the street and shops and shopping malls, movie theaters. They are totally illogical. Most of their speech and activity comes from emotions and feelings and all the indoctrinations and conditioning that is filled in their minds. Very, very rarely they will rise to this layer of logical ability that is found only in humans. And I'm not saying that to be a human you need to be Mr. Spock kind of logical person. No. You will need to invoke this ability when it is most required. Not always. It is perfectly okay to live an illogical life. There is nothing, no rule like this. And I'll tell you in a minute that it is actually impossible to lead an illogical life. It is impossible to have an illogical experience. It is very interesting. The most idiotic person there is most logical. So that is not an error. I am saying that even such people, most stupid people, are very logical. Why so? So once you have acquired this logical ability, you will see that the logic is embedded in nature. This whole world functions in a logical manner. It has laws, it has rules, it has laws of physics. It obeys them without fail. Everything happens in this world. If you consider the inorganic experiences not related to life forms, there won't be any difficulty in seeing that they are perfectly logical and rational in their own way. Nothing happens without a reason. And the reason is always perfectly logical. An ordinary person also can see this. In the whole world, there is logic and reason embedded in the world, in the nature. Now it takes only a mental scientist or a spiritual seeker to see that even the life forms, they behave in totally logical way. A tree grows towards sunlight. At the right time it flowers and has the right kind of chemicals to repel the local insects and fungus. It is all set in logic. You may find this is very amazing. They have their own set of laws there, the laws of life. And an ordinary seeker can see this. But it will take a really advanced seeker to see that the animal life is also totally logical. You will need a little bit of insight into the evolution of the mind here. Why do the animals do the things they do? The birds do not migrate towards equator in winter just because somebody told them, just because they get a phone call from somewhere that it's going to be very, very cold. Fly to the south. No. This seemingly logical, reasonable behavior is programmed there by evolution. This is how it happened. The birds that migrated survived. Therefore, that's all we see. Even the animals seemingly do logical activities. If you find an animal not doing something logical, illogical, that means you don't know the mechanisms of behavior there. They are following the program that is put there by Mother Nature. Millions of years of programming. And it is being very precisely executed in logical steps. Those who have the eyes to see can see this. Advanced seeker can see this. The animal mind is perfectly logical. It will take great insight to see that all human minds are also perfectly logical. Now, people may start disagreeing with me here, because just now I said that man is not a rational animal. Now, there are two levels of knowledge here. When you look at the superficial level, yes, it is true that nobody really looks like logical to a logical person. But when you take a deeper look, they do what they do. The seemingly illogical behavior is actually a series of instructions that are perfectly executed by their minds. And in a few minutes, I'm going to give you a few examples to demonstrate that. So a mind cannot deviate from logic. It is a computer. It is a machine. Whole of it, starting from the inert matter to the highest of layers of the mind, including the human layers, human intellect, and everything in between, and everything above it. Mind is a mechanism made up of patterns, processes, and memory. And they are being governed by the laws of the mind, which you must have studied by now. I have identified 11 laws, but probably there are many. These 11s that I identified is ancient wisdom. All the laws of the physics and even the social laws, they are a subset of the laws of the mind. It is perfectly rational. It's perfectly logical. These laws are called laws because they cannot be broken. And if a system, if a structure follows such immutable laws, it can only be called as logical. There is no irrational step there in all the activities of the mind. So the conclusion is, it is impossible to be logical for a mind. This may look like a paradox because just now I said that the seeker needs to cultivate this, and now I am saying that it is embedded in the mind. Yes, just like everything. This is also a paradox. To reach this insight that my mind cannot be illogical, you will need to go through the illogical. Try to see this. So just like you must have thought that what is so logical in this world? It looks a total chaos to me. But you need the eyes of a scientist to see that it's perfectly ordered, perfectly rational. It does no error. It does nothing without a reason. There is always a cause, which is perfectly rational. So even though it is seemingly illogical, there is no logical ability in the lowest layers of the mind, which is what we call as the material world, this illusion. Still, it is perfectly logical. And then you can see the lower forms of life. They are just machines. They're just more complex, that's all. And therefore, the variety of the behaviors is more. And it takes a little bit of intelligence to recognize the perfection of those activities. And similarly, the more evolved minds, they look more free. And the freedom sometimes looks totally illogical. So this is the good news, that logic is embedded in the mind. Very structure of the mind has logic embedded in it. The mathematical ability, the ability to find the equivalence, prediction, truth, contradiction, etc., is already there in your mind. You need to simply find it and put it into practice. There is a question, very deep question, that why is it possible for the human mind to even find the truth? How can the human mind discover the truth? How is this even possible? What is it in the Mother Nature that enables this kind of ability? And by now you must have guessed the answer. There is nothing special. The very structure of the mind has computation in it, logical computation. It cannot do anything else except logical computation. The seemingly illogical behavior is only our ignorance. Because of this ignorance, we cannot see what steps the mind took to arrive at that seemingly, apparently illogical behavior. So I'm going to give you some examples, but this is the good news. All you need to do is recognize this ability of the mind, sharpen it, cultivate it, and you will see this with your own eyes. The characteristic of a truth is it is self-evident, it is logical to the extreme. This is what a spiritual seeker is after. We want full certainty. We want the absolute knowledge, not the relative one, not that which looks like an illusion. So the logic will go through 3 steps. First, there will be no recognition of the logic. The mind will be illogical. The affairs of the mind will be illogical. The whole world will be illogical. The whole society will look like a chaos, a group of mad people. And the second stage will be, you will start recognizing the logical ability of your own mind, and that is cultivation of it. And you will then reach the third stage, where you will find that everything is perfect as it is. The illogical is also logical. It merely appears illogical because of my own ignorance about the mechanisms of the mind. It is very funny because all that the mind presents us is an illusion, and our instinct is to treat the illusion as illogical, irrational. If it is an illusion, it has to be illogical. It should not be there. But the paradox of all paradoxes is the illusion is perfectly logical. It must be this, nothing else. It is by necessity. Now you will need to think about whatever I have said, and don't simply assume these things are true. You need to derive them logically. You need to find the rational behind it. So to summarize, logic is the application of the rational ability of the mind. Logic is embedded in the mind. That means the whole of your experience of world, body, mind, whatever. In order to separate the true from the false, spiritual seeker needs to cultivate this inherent ability of logical thinking, rational thinking, critical thinking. So now what happens if you bypass this essential step in acquiring the knowledge? The answer is very simple. You end up with beliefs, probably also true statements, but you don't know whether they're true or not. Your faith is 50-50, and then you are shifty because somebody says something else and then you shift there. Oh, that is bigger guru, so let me go there, join him now. There is nothing of your own. This knowledge, which is like a copycat knowledge, is not yours. You don't have any faith on that. There is no certainty. The actions based on such illogical knowledge are also illogical. There is no hope of arriving at truth if you don't have even the basic requirements of logic. So what kind of logic should a spiritual seeker have? How deep this logical ability should go for a spiritual seeker? How powerful this should be? And if you're just starting, you need very, very basic. Like you need to find out the equivalence of two experiences. For example, if I define the experiencer as that which is beholder, which is witness of all experiences, then the statement that you are not the body should follow from that. It should follow from your own experience, because the body is that which I behold, and I am the experiencer. If you say, I am the body, this is a failure of equivalence. You have equated body with the experiencer. In your own experience, the body is an experience. So that is a simple example. If I say that all that you experience is not you, and then when I say all that you experience is also you, there is a contradiction here. And if your logical ability is weak, you won't be able to question this. Either you'll believe it blindly, or you will leave there, oh, I don't understand this thing. And that will stop your progress. If I say everything is perfect, and then I say, go and make your mind perfect, improve it, get this ability, sharpen this, cultivate that. Now it is a contradiction again. So you will need to see the logic behind all these statements. When I say something is by necessity, just like I said, the mind is logical by necessity. Why is that? You will need to know what it means by necessity. Necessity is when there is no other option except when nothing else is possible except one thing. When I say the experiencer is uncreated, and then you should be logically able to deduce that since I am the experiencer, I am also uncreated, and that means that which was born is not I, that which is born is something else. And then you can logically again deduce that since everything that is born dies, it means that which was born will die, and since I was not born, I won't die. This is prediction, logical prediction. This is how we derive the truths, and then we check it with our own experience. When I say that the experiencer is not bound by anything, now you can find the implications of the statement. And very quickly, logically, it follows that I don't need to be liberated. I don't need to do anything to be liberated, except to drop the belief that I am bound. This is liberation. When I say that all that can be experienced is not you, and you say that I feel this feeling, and I have this kind of sadness or happiness or depression, or I'm troubled by these and these thoughts, or I think a lot, and that is a classification error, because you're not using the logical ability to classify things, experiences. Because all these emotions, feelings, and states of the mind, they belong to the category or class of experiences. The subject or the I belongs to the category of the experiencer. So not knowing how to classify things logically will land you in this mess that I am this and I am that. And you will fluctuate. Whenever you are with the Guru, yes, you are established in the experiencer. You are established in your true nature. As soon as you go home, the mind is back claiming I am this and I am that. It is because the logical ability is not being exercised. The classification has gone wrong. If you simply remember, look, these things are the experience, this is not I. This is the end of the suffering. Suffering is gone instantly. It is not that the mind will stop doing whatever it does, or the body will stop doing whatever it does. Only that the identification, the classification will be broken. So you see the importance of the logic here. It is very, very fundamental on the path of knowledge. And you must have used logic throughout this teaching unknowingly, without even knowing that these are the logical conclusions, because I never say so that, look, this is how, this is true because of logic. No, most of the spiritual truths are experiential, self-evident. Still, in practice, while practicing, you will need to use the logic. There is no bypassing the logical abilities. So the good thing is that simply by learning like this under a teacher, you will start using unknowingly your logical abilities, they will become sharper. You can do, without formally knowing what logic is, you will start thinking and acting in a logical way. And you can see this kind of behavior, very logical, rational behavior, in a good student who is under a good teacher but has never learned the logic formally. So, logic is served with knowledge, on the path of knowledge, without calling it logic. Sometimes you can see that. So, a spiritual seeker needs this kind of logic. The very, very basic fundamental things should be able to classify, find implications, and derive new rules, new laws out of your existing experience, use the deduction, induction, reference, know what it means for something to be necessary, because this logical ability will stop all these questions about why, how. Because if something happens by necessity, your mind should stop questioning there. When I say the Atman is infinite, and now the question comes, why is it infinite? And I say it is by necessity. Anything finite will be perceived as finite, and the question will arise, what is perceiving this finiteness? What is it that is perceiving the boundaries? And how do we know there is a boundary if I cannot perceive what is beyond the boundary? And so by necessity, the Atman or the experiencer is infinite because no such boundary is perceived. It is formless, it is emptiness. Emptiness cannot have a boundary. It is by necessity that this statement holds that the Atman or the experiencer or the consciousness, the witness, is infinite. If you don't exercise this necessity rule here, your mind will go on questioning. No, why is it infinite? Why don't I perceive the boundaries? Probably there is a boundary and I don't know. And your mind will delude itself with this unnecessary questions. I've seen this happens to a lot of people because the logical ability is kind of lacking here. Don't know the meaning of necessity. Now here you can derive this truth that I am infinite. And then there will be implications of this. If I am infinite, then why am I accumulating stuff? Why am I attached to finite? And it will correct your behavior. It will become more logical. You will behave automatically, logically. This is how it works. So this may happen without even knowing what you're doing, without even knowing that I'm exercising logic. It may look like very, very natural. It looks right, it looks true, because the machinery of the mind is very logical. Sometimes there is a question that how is it possible for a machine like a computer to do something which is traditionally thought as belonging to the human domain, the human mind? Isn't it a miracle that the computer can come up with the right answer of which number is greater than which number? Because this is a logical operation. Or if two statements that are true are combined using the AND operator, why is it that the computer knows that the answer is true? Answer to this question is very simple. It is because logic is embedded in the structure of the computer. It is nothing but a logical machine. And why is it possible to have such a machine? Because the whole structure, the material world, has this logic embedded in it. If you arrange it in this particular way, you will find logical behavior arise in it. And the human mind is not different from a computer, especially the logical ability. It works exactly like this computer. And so this machine is a copy of human mind only. So this is a good thing that all you need to do is bring out this ability and start using it in order to gain knowledge. Now the question comes that if it is inherently logical, why do people do these illogical activities? Why is there most of the behavior is illogical and so on? And the answer should be clear. It is only that we don't know how the mind is operating, that we think this action has happened and looks like an illogical, irrational action. So I'm going to give a few examples to show that the mind never does anything illogical. It is always following perfectly logical set of instructions whenever it is acting. And superficially it may look like illogical, and we may need to correct a lot of it. That is not illogical. We may need to clear up these time wasting, ignorance producing, illogical activities of the mind. Even though mind is doing everything perfectly, they do not serve our purpose. In other words, the seemingly illogical but perfectly logical actions of the mind may not be useful for our goal, which is knowledge. So a simple example is, if a child is drowning and the father is standing there on the bank of the river, but he does not know how to swim, and anyway he jumps in the water and tries to save the child, and we say that it is a stupid action, it is an illogical action. Why did you jump when you did not know how to swim? And now instead of one, 3 or 4 people had to jump and rescue both of you. It was totally waste of time. You could have asked for help, or you could have died there with the child. Now sounds totally irrational action, but if you look into the mind of that father, you will find that the mind has done perfectly logical thing. The bias of the mind here was to save the child, and it had no other option but to try. It had knowingly overridden this knowledge that I cannot swim, but in desperation it has taken this chance, perfectly logical action of trying it anyway, because this bias or desire to save the child was much more stronger than the desire to save himself. The mind of the father executed this action. Now, when seen like this, it looks perfectly logical. Now you can still say the mind should not have done this thing, and now this is illogical, because you cannot say should, or you cannot have preference there, because the mind of the father was programmed like this through various causes like attachment to the child, or the evolutionary causes that parents are now programmed to protect their children. Sometimes the mind will compute a very illogical looking action in order to fulfill this agenda. Protection of the offspring is higher in the priority compared to the risk or the fear. So it calculates in a very intricate manner. The mind is doing that which we don't have any slightest idea about. We are looking as an onlooker from the outside, and it looks totally stupid and irrational activity. But this is what is happening inside the machinery of the mind. It is doing exactly that which it is programmed to do. It is doing exactly that behavior which the Mother Nature has programmed, which the laws of the mind are telling it to do. To others it looks like a total disaster, but the mind has done its job very precisely according to its biases, conditioning, programming, and the evolutionary mechanisms that are operating in the mind. We don't know what goes on under the hood of the mind, but yes, outwardly, superficially, this is totally illogical action. You may say like this. So that's why the statement that man is a rational animal, it does not compute, does not look rational, because we see people doing such things all the time. Actually, there is nothing called perfectly logical, perfectly rational. And there can be more examples like this, that you want to travel from one city to another, and you know the road is bad, so you hire a driver. Now it turns out that this is a logical decision, but it happens that the driver is a very bad driver, does not know how to drive. And instead of reaching the other city, you reach hospital in a broken state. So sometimes perfectly logical may not be perfectly useful. So there is nothing hard and fast here in the human society, in the human mind. It does whatever it does perfectly, but the results, the consequences are what they are. They are also perfect. They don't look perfect sometimes because of our own biases, and this is also perfectly logical. So when a mind does something which is superficially illogical, we call it a logical fallacy. Now, as you know, there is a long list of logical fallacies. I'm not going to go into that, but there are two kinds of fallacies that I know of, and the first is the formal fallacies, and the second are informal. The formal are when you are trying to implement logic, trying to apply logic in formal way. You're trying to prove a theorem, derive some mathematical result, or trying to assess something logically, and you do an unintentional and very honest error in your logical processing. That is formal fallacy. It means that the biases of the mind or the evolutionary mess is not involved in these mistakes, in these logical mistakes. It is simply a lack of experience in the logical field, or just an error by the mind. Whatever thought was logical turned out to be a mistake. So when you check closely, the formal fallacies also are perfectly logical, but let's not go there. This is established as far as this is concerned. And whenever I say illogical, it will be superficially illogical. So formal logic can have errors that we call formal fallacies. But informally, a human being can perform logical mistakes, can act illogically, and these are called informal fallacies. So a fallacy is an attempt of the mind to get a favorable outcome. Now, why do I say that? Because it's always the biases in the mind that will cause an error. It will be an ignorance, it will be a lack of knowledge somewhere, it will be bias to make something right, something to force the logic on it, and so on. For example, the gross generalization. If I want one community to look bad, I'll pick one person from there who is bad, and then I'll be very happy to declare the whole community, people of that kind, as bad, because I want that. And this is a fallacy. This is the fallacy of gross generalization. And suppose I want my statements to look true and logical, I'll pick only the examples from a set of examples that prove or an evidence for that statement. If I say this and this is true, I'll go everywhere in the world and pick such examples which prove that statement to be true. This is the well-known fallacy of cherry picking. Although the mind has done exactly that which it was instructed to do, the whole result looks like total garbage, totally illogical. Although the mind has done exactly that which it was programmed to do. So there is a long list of formal and informal fallacies, but you need to know only the essence of it. It is an error of some kind in the logical processing, and that error is always due to some kind of bias in the mind. It never does anything illogical. There is no fallacy there, but it looks like that because we are not aware of the bias, the real mechanism that happens in the mind. So in order to stop the errors, we need to see our biases. We need to see our conditioning, the conditioning of the mind, the indoctrination of the mind, and the evolutionary mechanisms, the processes that are in operation in the mind, and then such fallacies can be avoided. This is what I mean by cultivating the logical ability. It means nothing else. It means to see the errors that the mind commits. When these errors are removed, whatever the mind comes up with will be automatically logical. You don't need to force it to be logical. So this is the key word here. This is the trick to become logical. Know your biases. Know what causes mind to commit illogical actions, to arrive at illogical, irrational decisions, or to classify the statements wrongly as true, wrongly as false. All you need to do this, and it will automatically become logical. The remaining part is logical now. So, unfortunately, the list of biases is 100 times longer than the list of fallacies, and I can only refer you to proper literature to find out what biases are there. But I'm going to go and give you some examples which I cherry-picked from, from a list of biases, just to demonstrate what kind of mess there is in the human mind. This structure, most of the time, is a result of evolutionary processes, a vestige of evolution, and the remaining are conditioning, social brainwashing kind of thing, indoctrination. So I refer you to proper literature to get the full list of fallacies and biases. You can study them till the cows come home. This is a very big subject, but just to initiate you into this field, I'm going to, and for entertainment value, I'm going to give you some examples which I found interesting while I was studying those things. So remembering that biases are the trouble, you will need to find the biases in your mind, find the errors in your mind. Although fully knowing that mind is doing all that it is programmed to do, but if the program is not according to your desires, it will come up with solutions or answers that are totally useless for you. When such a use is not critical, then it can do whatever it wants. Rational, irrational, logical, illogical. You don't mind your mind. So for example, all you want is a little bit of entertainment. So you can totally, on the toss of a coin, choose a book or choose to watch a movie of some kind randomly without going through this painstaking logical process, because it is not useful. But when you are after hard truth, then you know that even a tiny bit of mistake is going to cost you many, many years, probably waste your whole life, because you have now arrived at a belief which is not true, thinking that it is perfectly logical. What has happened is a bias inside thinking process, and now it is perfectly illogical, totally useless for your goal. Your goal was to know the truth, to know the secret, and all you got was some garbage, because the mind has perfectly logically processed the garbage that is already inside it. You fail to check it, fail to clean it up. So it is very interesting. The mind is not a small thing, you can appreciate now. It is not that simply learning the logical tricks will get rid of the biases. The biases will be there all the time. And therefore, you will need to bounce your beliefs and statements off your guru, your teacher, or your peers. That is why this peer review is so important in science, because nobody is free from the biases. The form, the structure of the mind, this is how it has evolved. Now what can you do? So the most logical thing to do is find out that what kind of biases are influencing my thinking process, and then let them be there. They are not very useless as far as human life is concerned, but as far as spiritual seeking or truth or sciences or mathematics is concerned, they are a troublemaker. The biases, fallacies, and also can be a problem if your job involves logical thinking, such as the job of a lawyer or a doctor or engineer, a computer programmer. So it can be a problem if you don't know how to get rid of these biases, or at least to become aware of them, that, oh, this bias is active here and I need to be careful. The first example is called of biases is called bandwagon effect. It is the tendency to do things because so many people are doing the same, or it is the tendency to believe something because everybody believes in that thing, also called the group think or herd behavior. Now it is perfectly illogical. You will agree with this. And yes, it is, because logically does not follow that if there are many people who do something or think something, does not automatically make it true. But you will see this effect is everywhere, this bandwagon effect or herd behavior, herd mentality is everywhere. And it is because of a bias. The bias is evolutionary in nature. Human beings are a herd animal, a pack animal, social animal, you see. And the first priority of the mind is to remain alive in this society, in this group. This is the first priority. This is very logical from the point of view of survival. May not be logical from the point of view of philosophy or things people do and so on. Like everybody smoking in your school and now you need to smoke. That seems logical. I need to be cool like everybody else. So this is the bandwagon effect. Even though from a logical point of view and even from a survival point of view, this is not the correct action. But the mind is programmed to mimic others. The mind is ape's mind. It likes to ape actions of the others. And more people doing the same thing simply programs the mind to do that thing without thinking about it. So you can take the example of a child that is born in a specific culture and everybody speaks a specific kind of language, and you will find that becomes the language of the child because he has copied it without thinking. And so on. You can find a long list of acquired behaviors which we have acquired from society around us without even knowing. Everybody wears clothes. Have you ever thought, why is that so? Why do I wear clothes? And you will see that you acquired that behavior from the society. Now that does not mean that we stop wearing the clothes. It simply means that we see this and continue doing it because our survival depends on it. If you run naked on the street, well, they will lock you up. They will treat you for this irrational behavior. And the definitions of logical and illogical are not really logical from the point of view of the society. It is a herd of illogical people. So one must do that which others are doing. It amounts to life and death. So in the old times, when everybody avoided a particular plant because it killed a few people, and then whenever you saw that plant, everybody told you not to eat it, not to go near it because poison. And this was imprinted on the mind. When in the old times a tiger killed a few people, everybody told you not to go on that way where the tiger lives, not roam around his den because he will kill you. And this was imprinted on the mind. And now fast forward a few million years, what everybody is doing, what everybody is telling gets imprinted on your mind for the same reason. Because in the past, such behavior has kept that organism alive. So behind the herd behavior, behind the groupthink is evolutionary bias, evolutionary reason. That's why we feel secure and comfortable in doing that which others are doing, in looking like that which others look like, and in thinking and speaking in the same way other people are. We do not use logic, we do not use rationality to copy others. So this bias is perfectly logical. This is what was needed to keep the mind alive, to keep the body alive. And it is following the same thing, although mechanically, but perfectly. All you need to do is put a little bit of awareness, and whenever there is a need, you divert from this behavior. You clear this bias first. And you see the others are repeating something which is totally does not make any sense. And so you see this bias bandwagon effect, become aware of it, remove it, arrive at the truth yourself. Do not copy others. The next bias is the confirmation bias, which is the tendency to look for knowledge or information or an experience which will confirm one's preconceptions. That means which will strengthen the old beliefs. So you look for an experience or a book or somebody saying something which agrees with whatever belief you already have. This is called the confirmation bias. And whatever reasons are behind this bias, we need to simply see that I am now under the influence of this bias. I have a belief which I have not questioned, but my behavior is such that I am looking for confirmation of that belief without even checking first if that belief is according to my direct experience or not. The confirmation bias is used to prove one's point in debates. For example, a debate can become a matter of life and death. If you are in very old age, a quarrel can cause death instantly. So this is an acquired behavior where the mind will look for an escape, something which it can hold on to stay in the fight. Now I'm giving just an example. There can be more reasons for the confirmation bias. And one of the reasons that I think is the mind does not like to be proven wrong, because proving it wrong is seen as an insult. And the ego does not like this insult. It is like a loser's thing for the ego. And it is again for survival, because being insulted, being proven wrong, lowers your value in the society. And once that happens, your chances of survival, they drop like a rock. Nobody worries about you. So this bias has grown like this in the human mind since many, many generations. So it is very useful if you want to survive, but is a problem when you want to know the truth. So you become aware of it, see if the mind starts doing this in the process of acquiring knowledge, and stay clear of confirmation bias. There is a related bias. It is called conservatism. And this is the tendency not to revise our own belief, even when new evidence is presented which proves that belief wrong. This is called conservative behavior. What the mind is trying to do is conserve the old beliefs. It is trying to protect the old. And again, there are many reasons for that. The ego does not want to give up. There is a risk of being insulted, being kicked out, or if you belong to a community, belong to a tribe where everybody believes something, and one fine day you meet a person from another tribe and he shows you, look, whatever you believe is stupid. And now the mind has two choices: either to give up the belief and suffer in the hands of his own tribe, or to continue believing the old and remain safe and secure. Now, as we know, the first priority of the mind is safety, security, survival. So it chooses the belief instead of throwing it away and changing the behavior. Because as we know, most of our behavior is caused by the beliefs. Whatever we think is true governs our actions, governs our behavior. So the mind will perfectly compute the answer that, okay, you need to protect this belief even though it sounds like it is wrong. And the mind will twist itself, and anger and fear will be produced in the mind, and that anger will drive away that person who was telling you the truth. You will attack that person, kill him, or make him go away and disappear. And you will go in the security of this false belief because it's helpful in keeping you alive. This works very nicely when the survival is concerned. But when there is knowledge, you need to recognize the self-protecting mechanism in the mind and kill that mechanism fully knowing that it is not going to kill me, fully knowing that I am safe and secure, even if I let go of this idiotic belief that was put there by the society. All you need to do is, if you are if you are facing a society, don't tell them your new belief or new knowledge if you are so afraid. Or if you live in a society where freedom of speech or freedom of belief is not respected. So you need to live in such situations just like the tongue lives among the teeth. Be very logical here. There is another interesting bias which is called gambler's fallacy. And this is the belief that whatever happened in past can affect whatever is going to happen in the future. For example, if you flip a coin 10 times and you get the heads, all the 10 of them are heads. So the gambler's fallacy says that the 11th time also will be head. But what is the truth? That it is always 50-50. The probability is always 50%, not 100%. It does not matter how many times it has shown head. The 11th time can be both head or tail. Can be any one of the head or tail. So this is useful to know when you are seeking something and you are in a tradition and you have a nice guru and the guru told you 10 things and according to your experience they all are true, perfectly true. And now the 11th thing that the guru is going to tell you, you assume because of the gambler's fallacy that it is going to be 100% right. And then you become loose and you say, oh, I'm not going to check it with my experience. Probably he's always right, so this time also is right. You have faith on the guru. So you don't check it. You don't verify it. You don't ask for a way, a practice to verify it. Simply blindly believe it. And this is the fallacy here. There is an equal chance of getting the false information from the guru. It does not matter how many statements he made which were perfectly true. This new statement can be false. You need to check again and again and again. Sometimes I say that it builds up the faith on the guru. Yes, that is also true. The chances of this 11th teaching to turn out to be true will be bigger, slightly bigger, because it's not purely a toss of the coin. There are more complex mechanisms involved in the mind of the guru. So you can say like this, and you can have, the faith will increase, obviously. The trust is going to increase. But still, there is a chance that it will be wrong. It can halt your progress on the spiritual path. There is another bias in the mind that is called illusory correlation. Whenever two events happen, mind sees them, perceives them together, then the mind forms a relation between them. For example, the lightning and the thunder. So mind forms a relation between them. This is what has caused, and it will happen like this. Whenever it sees the smoke, it sees the fire, and then correlation is formed. And this is perfectly logical. But then it extends it to things which are not really related by cause and effect. A good example for a seeker is that brain activity produces your thoughts and consciousness. There is consciousness, there are thoughts, there is subjective experience, and there is also this objective experience of neural activity. And this past experience of the mind as a bias is now applied here. Oh, look, this activity of electrical activity is causing the consciousness. The fact is, you will never find the cause and effect there. It is just a mental bias, a failure to utilize logic. Not only the materialistic people, the spiritual, so-called spiritual people suffer from this kind of illusory correlations many times. It gives rise to superstitions. For example, you wear your favorite shirt one day and something bad happens on that day. Now, you wear that shirt again and something bad again happens next day. And it happens 3 times. 3 times is enough for the mind to correlate the shirt and a negative experience. And next time, You are afraid to touch that shirt. You don't want to wear that shirt because the mind will tell you that it is going to cause something negative, something bad will happen if you wear that shirt. Now, this correlation is done by the lower layers of the mind, the computational layers. They lack this intelligence to see that the shirt cannot cause anything negative. But it is sufficient to give rise to fear, and the fear appears in the body, in the mind. And if you are not aware of this mechanism of the mind, then a superstition will form in the mind. That means a belief will form in the mind. And I've given you a simple example, but this superstition is the foundation of a lot of irrational behavior among the so-called spiritual people. There is another bias in the mind which is called exposure effect, and that is the tendency to like something because you are familiar with it, you are exposed to it. So, for example, people who don't eat animals, they are not familiar with that kind of food and they dislike it. But those who are exposed to killing of animals and butchering them and cooking their meat and so on, they like it simply because they are exposed to these things and they see it as normal. Now, this is an extreme example that I'm taking, but there are everyday examples. For example, they flash a product 100 times on the TV, 1,000 times in front of your eyes. And whenever you go to market to buy something, and if you happen to find that product, the bias will come in effect there because you have seen it so many times, you will buy it. And that is the whole mechanism of advertising. They are trying to expose you to that product, and because they say so many good things about it, they are now impressed upon the mind, and mind will do that thing automatically, illogically. Whether it is good or bad, you don't think because you know it, you take it. And same thing happens for a spiritual seeker. If they are in a tradition, for example, they become familiar with it. And now something comes from another tradition, some other writer, some other guru, which happens to be in another tradition. And because there is no familiarity, this new teaching will sound totally alien to you if you are the spiritual seeker. And here you need to become aware of this exposure effect and take that teaching seriously. Find out if it is useful for you. There is a very good example of a bias which is called negativity bias. It is the tendency of the mind to recall negative events, negative people, negative thoughts more often than the positive ones. Actually, never recalls anything positive unless there is a trigger from somewhere. But negative things, they keep coming. Why is that? Isn't it illogical? Yes, it is. Why? And the rational mind should not do this. We should forget the negative and recall the positive. That generates more pleasure and happiness. But the mind does exactly opposite. It likes to dwell in negativity. Why is that? It has happened in the evolutionary history of the mind that remembering negative saved the life. So if that person, the primitive human, is walking on a path and hears a roar of a lion, runs away, saved the life. So when he is walking on the same path, after 1 month, let us say, the mind will promptly, like a good servant, will produce this recall of the roar of the lion. Now, the mind is not going to recall something which he has eaten, or the festival in the village, or something good, because the situation is telling the mind to inform the organism about the danger. So the negative is recalled, and that can save the life of that person, the primitive human. This is the cause of this negative bias. Negative is favored because it has saved the life. So that's why people read newspapers and it's full of negative news, because they find it useful. They want to know who killed whom and whether that killer is around my area or in some other country where I don't need to worry about it, and so on. So the mind looks for negativity. If you don't remember the face of your friend or whatever good fun you had, no problem. But if you don't remember the face of your enemy, somebody who beaten you up in past, somebody who insulted you, and so on, then it is just a disadvantage in survival. So the mind remembers all that bad people, all those bad people. Even if it produces a lot of suffering in your mind, the mind repeats it again and again and again. So this bias, negativity bias is in play when the mind is doing like this. So all you need to do is know that there is such a bias. Whenever there are negative thoughts, see that the situation is not negative. There is no real danger in survival, and just watch the thoughts and let them come and go. Now, it does not mean that the mind will stop producing such thoughts. It does not mean that. But actually, it will weaken the impact of that negativity. You won't be that much stressful, anxious. You will be peaceful and happy, even if mind is doing what it must do, what it thinks is logical. It is simply, the poor mind is simply trying to save your life. There is another interesting effect, which is also tribal effect. The reasons are tribal mentality, which is called not invented here effect. This is the bias. We seem to like things that are made by our own tribe. It can be products, or it can be scientific research. It can be standards such as feet or kilometer, or it can be knowledge, spiritual knowledge. If it is used in our community, our tribe, we favor it. If it is coming from some other group, especially a group about which we have very negative opinions, then we don't want to touch it, even if it is true. So such a bias will cause problems when your goal is acquisition of the knowledge. Most of the people are indoctrinated. They are filled with this negativity about other tribes, other countries, other races. That look, we are the best, we are the superior. Whatever is coming from that other side is wrong, it's totally useless, or is evil. And that stops the progress of that person who is looking for knowledge. So probably it is true for the products and so on, but as far as knowledge is concerned, you need to look everywhere, irrespective of which tribe or which group it is coming from. Related bias is the ostrich effect, which is simply ignoring the evidence, especially if it is a negative evidence. I need not explain it. There is another very interesting effect in the mind which happens to the seeker, and it is called pareidolia. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. And it is seeing the patterns where there are none. For example, looking at the clouds, you can see elephants, rabbits, and your grandmother, but they are just clouds. They are not these things. Something similar happens in case of knowledge also. You start seeing patterns where there is none. It can evolve into superstition, which is not good. So you will see, you are meditating and you will hear some noises in the mind. When you get up from the meditation, your mind will form a pattern out of those noises, and it will look like the voice from the above. And the mind will, like a good servant, will bring up a memory, bring up something related, or will form an entire sentence out of that little event, which is nothing but noise, meaningless sensation somewhere. And if you are not careful, if you don't know this bias of the mind to make patterns out of nothing, you will think that this is a spiritual experience that I had. It is an extraordinary paranormal experience that I had. I heard these words. So many spiritual seekers fool themselves like this. So please be careful. This is just illogical. If you really get this kind of message, it will be crystal clear. There won't be second guesses. If you don't, it is just mind making up things. Remember, if it's coming from a higher mind or a higher power, that higher power will have that kind of intelligence to make it clear and loud for you. You don't need to play the recordings backward, or you don't need to draw the random drawings and find meaning there, it is all stupidity. There is another bias in the mind which is called reactance. It is wanting to do something which is entirely opposite of whatever is recommended. Because the mind thinks that I am being dominated by somebody, being dominated, not good for survival, and it will do exactly opposite of what was recommended. Now you will see this everywhere in the society, and it's probably okay, they don't even think about it. But when it happens on the path of knowledge, it can be harmful. Your guru has given you some practices and all. Now the mind will throw up a big resistance there. It will want to do exactly that which the guru told you not to do. The guru gave you a mantra and he told you don't recite it more than 20 times per day. And now you want to disobey that and you want to do it 40 times per day. And you can now guess what can be the effect of that. Or you are going through some bad time and your guru told you to do something and you do exactly opposite. Because of this kind of bias, the reactance of the mind, it sees it as a reduction of its freedom. It sees it as a chaining and that it resists it. And this is also coming from the lower layers. Even if the higher layers know that I am doing this, they cannot stop it because it is so powerful. So intellect should be in charge, not the ego. Something similar can happen when you place little value or less value on a teaching or a statement which has come from a group or a person whom you don't like. Something similar. The mind will simply revolt against it, even if it is going to put you on the superhighway of evolution. Be careful of this bias, it is very strong. Another bias that is common is glorification. If things are glorified, if superlatives are placed above that idea or object, then tendency of the mind is to assume it to be true or to act in that way or to conform to that behavior of everybody, to obey that orders because they are glorified. And the ruling class, they take advantage of such bias of the mind and they glorify the things that they want people to believe. There is opposite of it also, and they demonize something which can be harmful to their dominance. So politicians are seen doing this thing. They glorify something which keeps them in power and they demonize people or actions which are not so helpful in keeping them on the top. So be careful if something is glorified, superlatives are being thrown around it, you need to double check it. Everybody tells you Advaita is the greatest truth. Advaita is ultimate. And Vedanta, whenever it says something, it is perfectly true. Be careful because somebody will pass you some really bad or really harmful fact in quotes, quoting it with Advaita, Vedanta or Buddhism, or by adding a great name. Look, Einstein said this. You don't know who said this, but because there is a glorification there, the mind has no problem accepting it as true. Or you need to be careful about demonizing also. If somebody says, don't listen to that guru, he is not good, he is a murderer, he is a thief, he is an abuser, you need to check at least once what he is saying. Probably it is a case of demonization. There is another bias in the mind which is related to glorification, which is also called beautiful person bias. If a person is beautiful, whatever he or she does or says is also automatically taken as truth, which must be your own experience. If it is the same thing is spoken by ugly person who is not so attractive and who amounts to nothing in the society, nobody pays attention to what he's saying. So why is that? Because in the past, in your evolutionary history, beautiful people were also fit people, were also healthy people, and they also were ruling class because they had this time and resources to appear beautiful. coated with gold and smell nice and look charming, glorified. So this bias is there in our minds, and also we don't want to oppose that person, because if that person is, let us say, very attractive, our chances of mating are reduced. If I say something, you're wrong, and that woman is not going to look at me again. So this evolutionary bias has been placed by Mother Nature for the purpose of procreation, and the beauty is given top priority because it is the measure of health. It is the measure of fitness of that individual, and consequently fitness of the offspring. So mind is doing everything very logically, what it needs to do, the ego part at least. But when you extend this same lower logic into the higher logic, somebody who is attractive says something, just don't assume it to be true. Don't think it is useful. That's why they use the beautiful people to sell their products. Have you ever seen an ugly person selling something? Even if the product is top class, nobody's going to buy it. So they will sell you crap if the beautiful person is advertising it. Why? Because the mind agrees unconsciously with whatever is being said. So there are many kinds of biases. For example, if a doctor is standing there with a toothbrush, you are more likely to buy that toothbrush. And that's why they show people in white coats and all these, there is a name written there, doctor this and this, and I recommend this toothpaste. It will kill all the germs in your mouth. And what do? You buy that toothpaste. You don't buy this other one which the ugly person has advertised. It is very strong bias. So even if that beautiful person is very cruel, nasty person, there is a tendency to forgive that person. So that's why people choose a beautiful partner, even if their behavior is not good, even if they are a subhuman kind of person. If they look good, well, I want that person. I want to be with that person. And such marriages are many, and they suffer for a long time. Related bias is that women are always good and they have more positive qualities than men. So this is the women are wonderful bias. It is our everyday experience that on the sales counter there is not man but a woman there, because she cannot cheat. She won't tell you a lie, and she will always obey your orders. This is our evolutionary upbringing. This is by Mother Nature. So most of the time that is right also, and then you trust a particular gender. It may not be true, you see. It must be your personal experience that the goodness or badness of a person, character, has nothing to do with gender. There are many such things, you see. When you were young, your mother sent you out with a man. Go with a man, he will protect you. And this is not true. Even men are cowards. Probably he will run away and leave you alone there. Who knows? So these gender biases are built in our society, in our minds actually. And that's why most of our, actions related to genders are totally illogical and irrational. Many people accept that and still do it. They say, I cannot help it. This is what my mind is telling me. And they think I like this thing. The word like covers it up. So this is my type. And then they go for it. And they suffer the consequences. It is all okay when it is a social situation. It's probably a learning experience. But if a beautiful person is teaching you a spiritual truth, you need to be very careful. Did you accept it just because the person looks attractive and has very sweet voice? And if somebody from the forest area or 110-year-old ugly fellow is telling you something, you don't pay attention because of this bias. And that will be your loss then. There is another bias which is called status quo bias. This is wanting to keep everything as it is. And this can cause some harmful effect if you are trying to destroy your beliefs, because this bias is very strong. You can see this in old people. They don't want to learn anything new. They don't want to give up whatever they think is right. They are still living in 100-year-old time. Time changes very quickly, and they want to remain like this. And you will say, what kind of stupid person is that? Or we call them old, or we call them illogical. But the mind is trying to keep everything as it is because it finds safety there. So now you know the drift of the mind, why it does whatever it does. It does everything as it is programmed perfectly. But you will need to see through the glasses of intellect to find out what is really happening. There is such a thing called authority bias. If somebody who is considered great, who is at a position of authority, whatever he says is generally accepted as true. So you can see this in the political following. Whatever their leader says, they blindly believe it without questioning it. Usually the authorities will abuse this kind of trust, this bias. Now, you know why this bias is there. Again, survival reasons. We are herd animals, and whatever the leader says, the herd follows. This ensures the survival of the individual in the herd. But when it comes to knowledge, you need to see, you need to double check why the authority figure has said something. Must be coming from a great teacher, great master. And most of the spiritual seekers will blindly believe it, or even disregard their own beliefs because somebody higher than them has said something which is opposite of their beliefs. So this is the authority bias. You need to be careful of it. And the good side effect of this is that you won't be manipulated by the authority figure who are trying to dominate and herd the masses. You will be free from them. There is another bias in the mind which is called naive realism, which is that everything I see is real as it is. Whatever is being presented in front of me by the senses, by the mind, by the world is real. Whatever appears in the TV is real. Whatever is shown in this documentary or YouTube video is exactly the way it is. And people will put that kind of arguments there. Don't you see this is real? This was the news in the newspaper. And the news says that the president has declared this and this person as terrorist. And everybody wants them dead now. You don't really know what is going on here. The president is trying to save his chair, or there is some political tension there. But this kind of bias will illogically consider the objective evidence as true. And they will blame or they will badmouth those who tell them to be cautious, to not believe what is in front of them. So this has given rise to a lot of problems in the field of knowledge. For example, some people think that these objects they see, the world they see is real, and they are the body. Because the body is the one who is perceiving and who enjoys the pleasures and pains that come from the world. And this is naive realism. They have not gone into the depths and not seen the illusion of it all. This is useful for survival. If the organism sees water and then drinks it and looks like water, tastes like water and keeps him alive, then the water is real. To assume our experiences as real, since there is utility in them, ensures our survival. But this is not true when it comes to the knowledge. It can be anything. You will need to examine your own experience. And certainly, whatever is shown in the TV, written in the books, appears on the internet and YouTube, is not true, is not real. It can be many things. Among those is a slight chance that it will be true, which you will know only after your own personal experience, not otherwise. Yes, it can give you information, and if the information is something which can save your life, then by all means consider it, because you need to be cautious a little bit. But if it has nothing to do with survival, you know that seeing that all the phenomena are illusions, not going to kill you. It will continue. The life will continue as it is. The human life in this body not affected at all, not even 0.1%. So, seeing this, you can keep this bias aside. But whenever it is needed, you act with this bias. When you are hungry, the food should be, you cannot say that food is an illusion. I don't want to eat it. Well, the food is real. This is what your senses are telling you. This is the objective reality. And this kind of belief is necessary for the survival of that organism. That is why it is there. As I said, the mind is perfectly logical. It is not going to adhere to a certain kind of manner or behavior if it is not favoring survival. The mind is a survival machine. It does not do anything illogically. But as soon as you extend the logic of the mind, which is good for survival, to the domain of intellect or spirituality or knowledge, then it falls short. It can cause problems. It can make you act irrationally, illogically.
Pure experiences.
You were listening to Pure Experiences by Tharun Pradhan.